Right. So we'll get started now. So we are talking about today how to migrate the code from one repository to the other repository or one environment to the other environment. So how do you migrate it? So basically, to start with, let me just open. We have a multiple ways of migrating the code, and we'll understand how it can be done using this. So the first one is using, so this is a one we're going to talk about how to migrate the code using a repository manager. And why do you need actually the migration? See, when you go to the real time, if you understand the SDLC lifecycle, so you basically have three types of environments, right? So one is a dev environment and another is a QA environment. And let's say you also have it as a production environment, what it is there. So as a developers, we'll have access to this and we all develop all the code, everything here. So each environment will be associated with one repository. So it's like, in our case, a development repository is like an info repo repository. And let's say for a QA, you have a similar type of a repository, let's say UA underscore repo. So it's like a UAT repository. And for a production, so you have prod underscore RPO. So these are all the different repositories which we maintain across the different environments. So what will happen is that in this we'll have access, we'll develop everything. And QA guys or a testing team will start validating your code once you migrate the code from your development environment to QA. And after the testing phase, ETL testing phase is done, then you'll actually move the code from QA to the production. And this is where your live data will be integrated into your data warehouse. And at the same time, your business user will start generating reports on a production environment. So this is how we maintain. The way how you maintain the three different environments for Informatica servers, in the same way, you'll also have a separate databases. So it's like for a dev, you'll have it as a EDW dev, something like this, enterprise data warehouse dev. And for UAT, you'll have it as a EDW UAT. And for a production, EDW prod. So you'll have a separate database servers also. Separate databases which will be configured. So this is your Informatica dev repository, QA repository, and then the production repository. Similarly, this is where all your staging tables, dimension tables, fact tables will be available. And this is a UAT and this is a prod. So in each of these databases, schemas, you'll have different other things for understanding all those. So now, whenever you develop the data objects here, that has to be migrated to the QA environment, and afterwards it should be done. Who is going to migrate it? So this is a job of your Informatica administrator. See, in few projects where you have more Informatica objects to handle and everything, you'll have an Informatica administrator who will help you to migrate the code. But there may be scenarios that you may be the solo developer who has to take care of everything. So including the development, administration and everything. So in those cases, how can you migrate the code, or what is the process that we follow to migrate the code in doing it? So what we do is, in general, for migration, we'll actually fill the template. So there is something called as a migration template. So Informatica migration template, what it is it will just contain the folder name in which your objects to be migrated contains, and what are all the different sources that you have imported, what are all the different targets that you have imported, and what are the maplets. And you also have the mappings. You need to include the sessions, workflows, and you need to mention the touch files when you are going to schedule all those workflows. And all these things we mention in the Informatica migration document. And this document will be provided to your Informatica admin guy. So, and also in case if you are using any parameter files, all those things, we will mention everything and then we'll pass it. So when you talk about a migration of the code from in case of Informatica projects, there are three types of migrations. I mean, three steps that you have to take for a migrating. So first one is about the database migration. So what do you mean by database migration? It's basically that, see, when you started building your data warehouse, you have created some tables in your staging area, you have created some tables in your data warehouse, dimension tables, fact tables, lot of things have created. How that will get migrated to your UAT? So you need to first use a database migration in the sense, so you need to create staging tables as per create staging tables in UAT, and at the same time you need to create required dim and fact tables as is. So this you need to do that. So who is going to do this database migration? So it will be done by your database administrators. So what are the things that you have to provide it to them? So it's basically that whatever the database scripts that you have prepared, right? So it's a DDL scripts. So initially when we talked about the SDLC lifecycle, I shown you. So this is a script to create all the TDBU tables. You need to create a script something like this, and this is a script for creating, let's say, in case if you want to add any data, master data kind of a thing, so you can pass it. So you need to pass these scripts. Suppose, let's say, if you have created any stored procedures in the dev environment, that stored procedure has to be compiled in UAT database. So those stored procedures as well. Create the dim and fact tables. Create any database objects. I mean other database objects like views in case if you have created any views, and materialized views in case if you have created any, or stored procedures if you have created, or packages, functions, anything. I mean whatever the database objects that you have added, that should be migrated to this. So for all these, we'll provide a scripts to your database administrator, and this first activity will be done by your database administrator. And the second one is that you need to migrate all the Informatica migration. So it's called as Informatica Power Center migration. You need to do whatever. Like in Informatica Power Center migration, what and all are the things that you need to do? Let's say you need to migrate all the sources and targets, whatever is there, and you need to also do the mappings, workflows, sessions, and all these things has to be migrated. And at the same time, you also need to migrate the connections. So what do you mean by these connections? See, you are creating a relational connection in the dev, and that connection you are using it in your sessions, right? Whenever you want to associate. So the same connection should be present in your UAT. If it is not present in the UAT, your sessions, all the sessions will become invalid. So first thing before the migration, any migration that you're doing, whenever you're doing an Informatica migration, first thing that you have to do is first you need to create a connections. See, here we have created two new connections. One is a OLTP source and another is a target underscore so and so. So what you need to do is, let's say OLTP source connection should be created, which will be point to your SDBU schema. And the next one, you need to create a target underscore Karthik. I mean, this is my connection. So generally we create a generic connections. We don't create connections with our individual names. So you need to create a generic connections. So something like OLAP underscore TDBU or OLAP underscore target. So this is what is your generic connection name. So we'll create first the generic connection name. See, when you create these connections in the dev database, it is pointing to the dev OLTP system. In the UAT, it should point to the UAT OLTP system. So the username and password should be of the UAT database, not the dev database. So when you are creating, so your Informatica admins know, they'll actually get in touch with your database administrators. They get the username and password, and then they provide the connection here. And this is how we do it. And in the Informatica Power Center migration, this is also called as you need to migrate all the parameter files, isn't it? See, your parameter files are available in the dev server, and how that will go to your UAT server? You need to basically copy all of them and then put it into your UAT server, and that also needs to be migrated. And at the same time, once you've done all of them, and you need to assign the appropriate integration service. See, basically the integration service in the dev is different, and integration service will be in the UAT will be different. So you need to assign all the integration service to the workflows. Without integration service, can we run the workflow? No, it is not possible to run the workflow. So you need to do that. And what about the next one? So you need to also schedule it. Schedule the workflows. So if you are using Informatica Power Center, then you can schedule it in that, or you need to schedule the migration for that. So if you are using a third-party tools, then schedule migration also should be done. Workflow schedule should be done in the UAT. So that migration also should be done. Workflow schedule migration in case of third-party tools. So if you are using that, just configure all of them there in the second part and then do it. So the database migration, you understand how it has to be done. Just give all the database scripts to your database administrator, they'll take care of it. In case of a third-party tools, it's like, yeah. And one more important thing, along with the parameter files, so you also need to migrate what? What is the thing that we have missed here? Shell scripts. If you have created any shell scripts or any other things, any type of a thing, you just have to put it into that one. So this is a way that we follow the different steps for migrating the code from one environment to other environment. So we are more interested, see the connections, whatever is the repository is there, first you go and create the connection in that, whichever the repository that you want to migrate. So let me open now, assume that I just want to migrate this into this. This is my UAT repository. So let's say I'm just connecting into this, and I'm logging in as an administrator. And so let me just try to do that. Let's say I want to migrate all the workflows, whatever is there in my March 9:30 p.m. EST folder. I just want to load it into this folder. Let me just rename this folder. Okay, I call this as March 9:30 p.m. EST folder. Okay, I have to migrate all of them to this folder. Whatever is there, I just have to migrate. There are maybe some existing things will be there, so we'll see that how it can be done. So now first thing is that you need to take care of the connections, right? So let me open the workflow manager. I know that my objects are using two connections. One is a OLTP source, another is a target underscore Karthik, right? So is these connections which are already exist here. So when I go here, and if I see, I do not find those connections here, right? So do I have those connections? I don't have. So first I need to create these connections. Go here, relational, and you need to create a new connection. It's going to be an Oracle connection, so just create it. So the first one is your OLTP source. So this is the connection, and your username is SDBU and the password is SDBU, and the connection string, you need to enter the UAT database connection string. So for now I'm just entering it as an ORCL. Okay, so that is one. What about the other connection that I wanted? Target underscore Karthik is something which I have used in my folder. So you need to create that connection here as well. So what schema it is pointing to? It is actually pointing to Karthik, and let's say this is changed to this one. Sorry, this one is, let's say ORCL is going to be the connection. So just create this connection as well. Now we have created two connections. We make sure that our connections are created. Now next thing is about the migration. See, migration of the code from one repository to the other repository can be done in the multiple ways. See, I can export the mappings, workflow sessions even individually in the designer tool also. If I go and export in the designer, what I'll get, I'll be able to export the mappings, all the mappings as an XML format. So one thing for a Informatica object migration is that, so there are two ways to implement Informatica object migration. So one method is that export and import method. So you'll export the workflows or the objects from one repository, and you'll import the objects into your destination repository. And the second one is your folder copy. So what you can do is you can just copy the entire folder from one repository, just drag and dump it into another repository. You can do that. And the third one is by using a deployment groups. You can use it by the deployment groups. So under the deployment groups you have two types. One is called as a static deployment group, and another is called as a dynamic deployment group. So we'll export it, we'll use a folder copy and static and dynamic deployment groups. So now we'll see the first option, how to export the objects and import it. So what is my working folder here? Let me log into my info. This is dev repository. So you can configure, see, within the one client you can configure n number of repositories, and those repositories can point to any type of an environment. So this can be your UAT repository and this can be my dev repository. I can configure both of them in the same client tool. So if I go here, see, whenever, it's always a best practice to do the importing and exporting of the object process from the repository manager, because whenever you do it, it will automatically export all the dependent objects. In the sense, if I export a mapping, it will export a maplet, source definition, target definition and everything. If I export a workflow, it will export all the dependent things, sessions, mappings, sources, targets, everything. So it's like under a parent, whatever the child objects that you have, it will take it. If you are doing it from the other tools like mapping designer and the workflow manager, it will not export the dependent objects. It's like if you are exporting from the mapping designer, then it will export only the objects which are designed in the mapping designer. If I go to workflow manager and export a workflow, will it export my mapping as well? No. It will export only the workflows and sessions, but the mappings, again, you have to do it separately. So always, that is the reason we always do it from your repository manager. So can I export all the workflows at once and then import each of them? You can do that. But, or if you want to migrate the individual thing, that also can be done. See, now what I'll do is I'll try to export this workflow. Let's say wf_m invoice flat file. So what do you mean by an export? Just right click on it, and when you click on export, it will basically show you, it will export that in the form of an XML. It will create it. So click on desktop and then save it. So now what it is doing is it is actually exporting all my objects. What are all the objects it has exported? Source definition, and then the target definition. You have a mapping, default session configuration, session and the workflow. Total 7 objects, 0 errors and 0 warnings. Now I need to go to my destination repository. So this is my destination repository. Let's say if I use repository and I call it as an import objects, go to that whichever the folder that you want to import. Okay, so you can just go here, repository and import objects. It will ask you to locate which file you want to import. So this is my file. So just click on next and click on next. See, it will ask you whether you want to import every object what you have exported into an XML, or you just want to import only sources. You can also be selective here, in the sense whichever the object that I want to migrate, I can select only that. Or if I just want to migrate everything, I can just use add all. So when you click on next, it is basically ask you which folder you want to import it. Now I want to import into my March 9:30 p.m. EST folder, and click on OK. Let's say click on next. So do you want to check in after import? I mean, as soon as you check in, do you want to check in it? Then you can enter the appropriate comments, or once you import, when the object is valid, then it is good to check in. So let me just go here, next. And there are certain rules that you can define. So what are the rules in the sense? So I'll come back to these rules. What rules you can do? See, what is the case is that when you're actually importing an object, that object might be present in the database. So in that kind of a conflict, whether you want to replace that object, or you want to rename that object, or you want to use the old version what is already available. So these are the different types of conflicts. So you need to make sure that, okay, whenever there is an object which is already there, you just replace it. You are sure that so that kind of a rules you can set it here in that screen. So when you do that, what will happen is that by default it won't ask you whether you want to replace the object or not. Now see here, since I have not set any rules, it is asking me. What it is saying? Default session configuration is actually unresolved. That means it is already existing. So it says that not resolved yet. Please choose one of the following resolutions. So basically this is already existing. Do you want to replace it, or do you want to reuse the existing one, or do you want to rename it? So let's say I want to replace it. So select it. Now it is replaced. When you click on OK, so this is what it says. Default session configuration will be replaced and everything else will be copied because those objects are not present in this. So when you click on this one, let's say if I click on import, it will try to import everything. See, now this is what. See, for some reason when I've actually created, it is actually pointing to the connection. Why is that so? Okay. Employee and the invoice both are there. So it is valid, completed and importing of an object. It has thrown the warning. See here, it is for some reason it is actually using my different connection. So since it is using a different connection, it has thrown the error saying that Kiran_target is not found in your connection reference. This connection is not there, and that's why it has actually thrown the warning. Now if you go and check, probably that would have become invalid. And another warning you have is, say the integration service info integ specified is not existing in your target repository. Means obviously the integration service will be different, so you have to assign the new integration service. So how many warnings? There are 2 warnings, but it was successfully imported, everything. So let me go to now to the design, workflow manager to check it. So let me connection. Yes, first you need to create that connection. That is what, like without creating that connection, suppose let's say if your objects are using any other different connection, first you need to make sure that connections are already there. That's why for your admin guys will create all the connection names here only, because they'll come to know, okay, this is a new connection that you have created. First they'll create all these new connection. In case if you miss any connection here, that means they have not created it and imported it. All your objects will become invalid. So what happens if your objects become invalid? Then you have to go to each and every session, again start assigning the connections. So it's like a tedious task. So which we don't do that. Now I go here, I go and check, this is my mapping. So if you try to see, this has become invalid, see, because there is no connection which is present when I try to import. That's why you need to make sure that connection is always exist in it. So otherwise I need to go like this and provide the connection as an OLTP source and just click on OK and then apply. Save it. So this is a way you should do it in case if you don't create a connection priorly before importing. Now if I go and check for this workflow, I don't have an integration service. So suppose if I have imported some 10 workflows, can I go and modify each and everything to assign the integration service? That is not the way to do that. So you can assign the integration service at one stretch. For a complete folder, I can do it in only one stretch. So how can I do? Let's say assign to workflows. Just right click on it. There is an option called as assign to workflows. You can select which folder that you have imported. Okay, so this is a folder which I have imported, and I want to assign the integration service to all of them. So just assign. Now integration service is assigned. So you can assign the same integration service to all the workflows in the repository. That is also possible. Or you can be selective when you are choosing the workflows. Now when you go and see, this would have been assigned with an integration service. So if you could try and check now, the integration service is available. So this is another one, you need to do that. And the parameter file shell scripts, I'll tell you how it has to be done, and you know how to schedule the workflow. Once you migrate it, you know how to schedule the workflow. We have seen that in the dev, right? So similar kind of a thing, you have to migrate it. So parameter files and the shell scripts, what they do is, whatever the things that you have developed, they use WinSCP. First they'll copy all the shell scripts and everything into their local machine, and from the local machine they will start again to the UAT. So that's how they migrate the code using this one. So parameter files and the shell scripts will be done by using WinSCP. Be done by WinSCP, or if you have a connectivity, that can be done. So now this is more about the migration by using an export and import objects. See, when you have an individual workflows which has to be migrated, let's say if you have 5 or 6, this is a method that you can follow. You can export one by one and then you can import it. What happens, let's say you have actually created an entire new folder. Folder itself is a new one. So your folder contains some 100 mappings or 100 workflows are there. So for exporting each and everything will take a time, right? So that case, what you can do is you can just copy the folder. So how you can do it, I'll just show you the wizard how it can be done. So you can just go here, let's say this is a folder which I want to copy. Go to the edit and there is an option called as a copy. So just use copy. This is a very simple approach. So just use it as a copy and then open this one and then edit, paste. When you do that, it will just populate this, a wizard, and you just have to follow the wizard and then copy it. So when you try to do this and click on next, and if you want to keep this persisted values, in the sense, let's say your sequence generator has run and your sequence generator has run in the dev till some 9,000 value. So do you want to retain all those values for a sequence generator and everything? Then you can select yes. If you don't want to copy the persisted values, then it will start from the first one. So if you don't want to copy it, then you can use it. So these values, see, it has thrown the error now. When I try to do that, it has found a matching for these two things, but it didn't found a matching for this. It is throwing the error. That means this connection is not existing in your destination repository. It is asking you to create the connection first and then merge. So for this, the match is found. Means when it is copying, first it will check what are all the connections are used by your objects, and then it will try to match whether with the same connection name it is already present or not. If it is not present, then obviously if I try to do, see, and it is also saying the source folder contains a shortcut that depend upon the following shortcuts. So we have created some shortcuts from the ODS sales, right? But that ODS sales folder shortcuts you don't have. So do you want to copy the session and workflow run history? In the sense, whatever the runs that you made, you want to run it. Generally we don't need that. You can just click on it, and when I click on finish, it will create one XML with all the information, big XML, and it will start migrating from that to this. If you try to do this, it will start migrating all these. So I don't want to do this basically because it throws a lot of errors for me. Okay, let it go on. So it's trying to see what it does is these are all your repository tables. See here, copying OPB table, OPB workflow, OPB session, what it is going on. These are all the repository tables. What it does is it will read the data from all those repository tables and it will generate one insert script kind of a thing and then migrate it. Now, except the shortcuts, see, there were no shortcuts. See, I don't have that ODS sales folder here, but my folder is still referring to that shortcuts. That's why these are all the things which have become invalid, because there is no mapping which is existing. So you want to Okay, I think there was a different folder, that's why it has created a new folder name here. This is folder name is different and this folder name is different. So it has created a new folder, and when you try to see, these are all the objects which is being imported. So this is how, this is a one way of doing it. If I want to delete a folder, just a simple thing. I mean, it will delete entire objects from your folder. So, and you assign the integration service after the migration. This is like a folder copy in the sense, whenever you have developed everything from the scratch and you want to, yes. So this is what your question, I think your question is answered already. Like it doesn't copy the shared folder. It has not copied for me, right? So it has invalidated all the sessions because whatever the objects that were there in the ODS sales folder, it has not copied. So in case if the ODS sales folder is already available in your destination repository, then you don't have any issues. It will just try to match the shortcut with that. Otherwise, it won't do that. So this is how you can do the folder copy. So this is one way of defining the, another way of copying the objects from this to this one. So folder copy. What is the need of deployment groups? What is the need of deployment groups is that, suppose let's say your migration includes in this way. Let's say in one folder I have 2 workflows. In another folder I have 1 workflow. Likewise, I have 10 folders and my workflows are spread across one workflow across all the 10 folders. So what you have to do, you need to go to each and every folder, export it, and then import into destination repository. So which is going to take a half a day time for you. So is there any best way that I can just do a migration of 10 workflows at a single shot? Yes, you can do that. That is by using a deployment groups. So deployment groups are of 2 types. One is by static, another is by the dynamic deployment groups. So what I can do is, whenever you want to migrate this, these are all so many deployment groups are there. So first let me delete all of them. So this is of, it will be easier for us to understand. So that I'll show you both the type of deployment groups, static and dynamic deployment group. Now I don't have anything. What you need to do is you just need to add a new deployment group. Suppose it will ask you whether you want to go for a static or a dynamic. Let's say I want to go for a static. So March 2015, let's say static deployment group I want to create. So who is the owner, and then just click on OK. Now once your deployment group is added, now I have the workflows to be migrated which is spread across the multiple workflows, right? So what you need to do is, so basically you just need to keep on adding these workflows to that. So how would I do that? Let's say if I have to migrate this workflow, what you need to do, hold your left mouse click button, slowly move it on to your top and then add that to your deployment group. So when you add it, it will basically ask you, do you want to copy all the dependencies, only the non-reusable, or no dependencies? I want to copy all the dependencies, whatever is there. When you click on OK, it will copy entire dependencies. There are total 17 objects are there. All the 17 objects have been copied here. Similarly, if I want to, let's say, migrate from this folder also, I want to migrate some workflows, or if I want to migrate some mappings. So just use it and then go and add that to your static deployment group. So what we are doing, why do we call it as a static? This is your job. As an administrator, you need to copy each and every object what is present across the different folders into this. Right. So when you do this one, it is basically give you all the things. Now a static deployment group is created. So suppose let's say all the 10 workflows you have added to the static deployment group. Now it's an easy process. See, it's just that what you have to do is just go here. Now once you create the deployment group, just drag and drop, that's it. When you scroll it, observe the above my taskbar, what is it? It's saying deploy a deployment group. Above the taskbar, you see small notification when I'm actually releasing the mouse. It says that, do you want to deploy a deployment group? Here, see why it is showing the error. selected repository is not open. It is throwing the error. So if you want to drop it, so it says the deploy a deployment group. Now when you drop it, again it throws the same user interface wizard. When you copy the folder, right? So in the same wizard it will tell you, and you need to choose the destination folders, which folder it has to go to. You can select the destination folder. If these folders are already not present, you need to create them. If it is present, it's fine. So you can just follow the wizard accordingly and then it will migrate. So what is the disadvantage with the static deployment groups? It's again a headache, right? So for you, each and every object, you have to move it to that folder and then copy paste it. Is there a way without a manual intervention I can just run deploy it? That can be done by using your dynamic deployment groups. So how would you do that? In case of a dynamic deployment group, basically you don't go and copy each and every object into your this one. So then how can I define a deployment group? So basically when you're creating it, you can select the dynamic deployment group. Okay, so suppose let's say this you have it as March 2015. So dynamic deployment group. So let's say you need to actually associate the query to the dynamic deployment group. What do you mean by query here? So basically you can define your own query. So what query I have to define? So whatever the query that I'm defining it, right? So it will go and query my repository database, and whatever the objects that are satisfied for this query, all the objects will be assigned to dynamic deployment group. At the runtime, whenever you deploy the deployment group to your destination repository, it will run that query in your repository database and collect all the objects which has to be migrated, and it will go and move all those objects. So how it can be done? I can define, let's say this is my, let's say March 2015. I can write my own query, whatever it is there. So this is like a query type is shared, means it will be available for all the users. If you want to write a personal one, you can write on your own, and you can write the query description. And here I can define your parameter name can be anything. So let's say in the particular folder, whenever the folder value is equal to, I want to migrate only the objects in this folder, so I'm just giving it as a March 9:30 p.m. If you have an additional values, then you need to is equal to is one of these folders. So when you do this, you can do the multi-select. It will allow you to do the multi-select. Or if you just want to give it as only equal to, then you can select only one value out of it. So now if I try to use, so basically I can define my own query here, March 2015. Let's say if you want to add an additional parameter, yes, you can add one more parameter. What it is? Let's say user is equal to administrator. Whenever the user is administrator, whatever the objects that are created by the administrator and which are checked in, you can even add one more query saying that, let's say the checked in status or check-in time, anything you can use, or a business name or an impacted status or an object type, or you can even call it as where object type is equal to only mapping. I want to migrate only the mappings. So you can define any query here based on the parameters. So you just save it. You want to check how many objects will be retrieved by this query, you can just run it. These are all the objects which are retrieved by your query. That means all these objects will be migrated. So just close this. I mean, once you are done, save it, close it. Now the query for this March 2015, if you go and check, there is a query which is associated, just close it, and I have associated the query here, and then click on OK. Now if you see the dynamic deployment group, it doesn't show you the number of objects, how many you are actually migrating, because at the runtime it will query your repository database. Now you just go and deploy it. That's it. Basically it will use as your query what you have written in the backend and query all the objects and migrate the code from that to this one. So this is how you can migrate the code from one environment to the other environment. So this is another approach of using a dynamic deployment group. So if a folder is pretty much new in my repository, then I'll go for a folder copy. It's a waste of time. So, and if you want to just only one or two objects, if you want to do that, you can go by export and import, or you can go by the deployment groups and then assign. So this is a migration, how the migration happens in case of your migration happens in case of the general real-time approach. So this is how we migrate the code with the help of this. Now obviously the question is that when you are actually migrating the code, all the repositories should use the same code page. Suppose if my development repository is using UTF-8 and my UAT repository is Microsoft, then the code page is not in the sync. You cannot do that. So when you are creating a repositories, you should have a same code page which is maintained across all the things. Then only it is easier for you to do that. Now the next question is that you might be having this, okay, whatever the work that we have done on the server, can we export and import it onto the VM? What you use after the course. So now you all guys have actually developed it, so many things, so many examples in this. You want to export all these backup into your into your VM. See, in your VM you already have that UTF-8 repository which is already being created, and you have to just import that into that one. So how it will work? So basically how it will work is I can export all the things at a time. So whatever the work that you have done, this is my folder now. Let's say this is my folder and I want to export all of them at a time. First check in everything. So in case if you have any checkout objects, first check in all of them and just enter appropriate comments. And now I need to export all of them. So how should I do it? It's just a small process. Just select each of them. What I've done, I've selected everything. And can I export into a single XML? Yes. We'll send you this backup in case if you want this backup as well. What Trainer has actually developed. So that backup also will send you. So suppose let's say March 2015. This is a 9:30 p.m. EST batch. So all the objects, whatever is there in that, everything will get exported. So it probably whatever the objects that we have created so far, and likewise you can export this complete thing into your XML file, and there are total 144 objects. No, I didn't click on a folder. I just used a shift button and selected all the workflows. So when you use everything, it will just give you an option. So obviously it will stuck for a moment because it takes a time because you're exporting a huge file. Okay, that's fine. It's still faster. Okay. So now you're able to see 0 errors and 0 warnings. I've exported everything. So when we send this file, in case if you want to import this and keep this as a reference for you for a future practice, you can always do that. So your admin team will send you this file. You can attach this file and then send to them. So they can import this onto their VM. So that is how we will actually export the things and then do it. So this is more about your exporting of the workflows and the importing on according to that. So this is about completely about the migration of the code from one repository to the other repository. And similarly, once the testing is done, then again you need to prepare one more migration document to move the code from UAT to the production. So that's how it works, and this is a way that we migrate the code. But during the database migration, can we do it across the heterogeneous databases? That depends. See, when you talk about a database migration, when you define an architecture of your project, you need to make sure that if you are in the dev, you have an Oracle as your data warehouse. In the UAT also, the Oracle should be the data warehouse. Suppose if in UAT my Teradata database is my data warehouse and in the dev Oracle is a data warehouse, obviously you cannot migrate the code. Heterogeneous migration will not happen. The databases should be same across all the environments. So no, Informatica is fine. Informatica, suppose if your development is on the Windows environment, Windows Oracle, and in the UAT you have Informatica with SQL Server, still you can migrate the code. It doesn't depend. It is not depends upon your repository database. It basically, but his question is like during the database migration, can we do it across the databases? Let's say you are in the dev you have an Oracle database and as a warehouse, and in the UAT you have Teradata as a data warehouse. Obviously it will not match, and even the programs what you have designed also will not work, because in the dev all your workflows are pointing to Oracle database, and in the UAT you are actually asking Informatica to load the data into Teradata. That will not happen. So obviously if you have to do that, it should be common. I mean, architecture of your project should be common. I mean, homogeneous kind of a thing. In the dev, whatever you're using, it should be used in the target. I mean, UAT as well. That's how it works.
Karthik, let's say if you have a use case something like this.
Can you come little louder, please? I mean, your voice is little low.
Hello? Karthik, am I audible?
Yes, yes.
If the use case is something like this, suppose if the dev team has started the integration to a Oracle data warehouse, all the development. So after a certain stage, if the user want to migrate his environment from Oracle to Teradata, say, so he no more want to work with Oracle data warehouse. Suppose say his requirement has increased and he want to migrate to Teradata. So now how should he proceed? How should he proceed with all the migration logics? Actually, it is possible that one can migrate from one other database to Teradata. That I know that. But from the point of data integration, here we are using as a Informatica target database, right? So here it is possible or not, I don't know. But actually, one can migrate from Oracle to Teradata database.
Okay. See, in those case, you talked about the database migration. Like once your warehouse is actually moved from Oracle to Teradata, now my Informatica objects has to load the data into Teradata system. So what you need to do in that case is that now you started using all the relational connections as Oracle. So these all the Oracle connections, whatever you have created here, should be replaced by Teradata connections. So here you go and create a Teradata connection, and all these connections should be assigned to your warehouse. Wherever your warehouse connection is being used, that should be replaced by Teradata here. Then your integration service, when it is loading the data, it uses the Teradata connection what you have created and then load the data into the target. So since your warehouse is already upgraded there, already, I mean not upgraded, you mean to say that it has been already migrated. So now you need to take care of your Informatica to load the data. So now in each and every session, wherever I have used Teradata, I mean Oracle as my warehouse, this is my, not this one, so probably if you go for another example, let's say this one is basically, oops.
So it is finally the matters that only the connection names finally matters.
Connection names, and there may be a few connection names, and sometimes if you are using a pre-SQL, post-SQL, or these are all the things will come into picture, and the loading of bulk and the normal, all these things will come into picture when you actually upgrade the warehouse, I mean migrate the warehouse. So these things you have to take care. So it's like an again a separate project for you. So basically once you point it, then you need to run a dry load, run a dry run, and then see that whether all the Informatica objects are valid enough to load the data into my Teradata, new Teradata database. And then you can just migrate all these things again into the production and then make it as a live environment.
Yes,
so there may be small changes like pre-SQL, post-SQL, these options, upsert, insert logics, all those things has to be changed.
Yes. Okay. Thanks.
All right. So now we do have, I do have one thing to share it today. See, basically the connection information, right? So connections are maintained in two ways in the real time. So one is that we use a static connections, and another is that we use a dynamic connections. So what do you mean by static connections? Static connections is an approach what I told you, because see, the connection name is going to be same across all the environments. So in the dev also the connection name will be OLTP source, and in the UAT also it is going to be the OLAP underscore target or whatever. So all the connection names will be same, but these connection names in UAT will point to UAT database. Connection names in the production will point to the production database. This is how you maintain. And the another way is that by passing the connection names using the connection variables. How would I do that? See, whenever you want to pass the connection name as a variable, so if I go here, when you are doing it, you can just assign the connection variable value, just like the way how we pass the parameter, right, in the parameter file. So you can just go here. Okay, these are all being checked in now. So let me just check out. So connection variable, now you can go here. When you are providing a connection, it always chooses you to use the object. Using the object is nothing but you are selecting the static connection. Or you can use a dynamic connection. So something like this. This is your connection variable. I'm using the connection variable name as $db connection OLTP. And for a OLAP, I'll define something as $db connection OLAP. And in that case, so what you can do is, instead of using a connection object, let's say connection OLAP is something. So you have two connections, but these are the dynamic. What connection name you're passing? That you can pass it as a dynamic one. So here, when you talk about $db connection OLTP, the $db connection OLAP, these values I'll initialize in the parameter file. Suppose if I'm running the workflows in the dev, I'll use a dev database connection, and if I'm running in the OLAP, I'll use a different connection. So these connections will be defined at the integration service level. Let's say if my integration service name is INFA INTG underscore dev. This is at the integration service level, I'm defining them. So OLTP, so it will be like OLTP underscore dev is my connection name. This is nothing but your connection object, what you have created. Okay. So this is, it will be like OLAP underscore dev. And this entry you need to make in the parameter file. So let's say if it is UAT, and this is going to be UAT, and this is going to be your UAT database. So if it is in the prod, you'll have a production database. This is how you initialize the connection dynamically. So if there are some 10 to 15 connection, you'll define all the 10 to 15 connections here, and accordingly you use it. So this is about the prod. Let's say this one is also a production, and this one will point to the prod. So this entry will be there in every parameter file that you are actually using. So this is how we maintain the connections. One way is that use a static connections, another is by variables, dynamic connections. And we have a question here, how to flat file paths will be same in dev, test and the prod process? Yes. See, what happens with the flat files is that whenever I have actually used, we actually follow certain standards, some practices. Whenever we talk about the flat file paths, we'll always keep all the source files in the source file directory, target files in the target file directory. We never gave the custom paths. So, so your source file directory and the target file directory, all these things, when we set up Informatica in the different environments, what we make sure is that your path where the Informatica is installed, it will be same. In the sense like, if I use I have it as U01 app info, and then the server, let's say info shared is my dev. Okay, so this if you talk about the source files, this is a path. Okay, till this path, it's going to be the common path. It's just that it will change. So in order to modify the paths in the different environments, what you can do is you can always go and then modify those path information in your admin console. See, these values are hard coded. When you talk about $PM source file directory, and when you talk about $PM target file directory, all these paths are initialized in your admin console. I can anytime go and change it. If the path is different, then in the UAT environment, I'll go and change the path in the admin console so that it will take care of it. So you don't need to worry about, anyway, most of the time we'll maintain the same path even across the environments to avoid the confusions. So if your path is properly defined in the admin console, it will be taken care of. So as a best practice, you should always define them in the source file directory. Keep them in the source file, and that will be done. So where can I change the path? In the admin console, you can log in there. If I go to your this one, so if I go to this integration service, and if I go to the associated now processes, here you can change the path. If your path is different in UAT, you can go and change this. It will automatically reflect everywhere. But always use these paths only for validating this. So this is more on your this path. All right. Yes, obviously it will be different. That's why we are assigning that integration service in the workflow manager. Integration service name is going to be different for every environment. So that's pretty much about we have on the migration part. And tomorrow we'll talk about the performance tuning and some complex scenarios and the interview questions. Probably we'll have a class little extended, maybe for 1 hour 15 minutes like that, and then we'll wind up tomorrow. That's it I have. So I'll send